Hello, and welcome to Tuesday afternoon. And we're another bonus this afternoon. This is a quick introduction to effectors, or specifically 2D effectors, which is a physics object that allows you to kind of exert forces on other objects that have rigid bodies and things on them in the environment. So, this is, I have an environment here with a couple of different objects. I've got my squirrel hero, and I've got this ant, which is just sort of I can just throw him around. He's just a simple sprite render, and I'm going to put a rigid body 2D on him. And I'm going to put a circle collider 2D on him. Okay, so there's our ant, so to speak. And we're going to drop the ant and the squirrel into the scene, and you'll see that the ant is doing all kinds of fun, weird stuff over in there. And the squirrel is also having some interesting interactions with stuff. And let's see here. We can jump around. Oh, other bonus is that there is a joint in the scene. So let's see. Let's talk about what's kind of going on here. All right. The effectors that are here are a area effector, a point effector, and some what are they called? They are called area effectors and surface effectors. Yeah, okay. They are surface effectors. I was getting it wrong. All right, now, the trickiest thing about effectors, using an effector against a free-falling or just kind of a uncontrolled object is pretty simple, right? Because all you have to do is have a object in the game with a rigid body 2D and some type of collider on it, and it will have these interactions with effectors. So, for example, a point effector, there's going to be just a point on on an object here. So let's look at this acorn, for example, and the acorn has a circle collider, which is, in this case, it is just a trigger used by the effector. And there is going to be, whenever you have an effector, normally you have to have some sort of collider that is used by effector, so the effector knows where to have an effect. Okay, so the point effector is at that particular point, and what's going to happen is it's going to push things away or close or draw them into that particular point. You'll see up here, point effector. I am going ahead using the collider mask so that everything, it has its own kind of mask here. It will interact with everything that is checked here. And it has a force magnitude, so that's the magnitude of the force that it's going to exert. And there are some variations if you want to have randomness to it. You can scale it according to how far, right? How far from that point you are, and the force source and target is, so it's sourced at the rigid body, forced at the rigid body that intersects with it, and so on. And the force mode is, as long as you're in contact with it, as long as you're at that point, it is going to be a constant force exerted. So let's go ahead and play, and we're going to try to move our squirrel over here, and you'll see the squirrel kind of bounces off of there if I do kind of jump him on. So he's going to get repelled. He's actually not, it's not just bouncing off, he's being actively repelled from that point if he touches it. Okay. Similarly, if we had dropped the ant on there, it would also do the same thing. So a point source, and let's switch this around and say force magnitude -100, and see what happens. Whoa! See how it got drawn into it there? So let's see, -20. So with a point effector, if you get close enough, once you get into its point of influence, you will get kind of sucked in. And depending on how much mass you have, you may or may not. If you had any additional force, you wind up shooting out to the side. You have to be careful about that. Oh. All right. maybe I should go ahead and I'm going to paint in uh, some more stuff there so I don't fall off the end of the world. So the tree, and we'll go ahead and we're just going to paint in some other weird texture over there. And now, so see, the moment I get close to it, it kind of kicks me out the other side. Oh, there we go. Now we're kind of bouncing around. We're being sucked in and out, so we're kind of stuck in this orbit of this effector point, this point effector. It's kind of neat. If you have like locations in space and you have spaceships that are floating around, you want them to be kind of sucked into the gravity well and that kind of thing. That's kind of a cool application of that. Okay, the next thing that has going on. All right, there is this branch. I've kind of hidden some of the branches sort of behind the trees here. And, oh, well, first is this shrub. And the shrub is an area effector. And basically, it is going to exert a force that the moment something enters that area, it's going to be pushed out of the area at a certain angle. And it's going to just add a force depending on how you sort of enter into the area. So you'll see it kind of tries to push it out. So let's look at the bush there. And let's see, where is that one? We'll zoom out a little bit here. Oops. So that is. Let's none. Let's get out of tile mode here. Where's the grid? Main camera branch. I think that's the branch here. Yeah, it's got the area effector. And so you'll see it has a 90-degree force angle, which means it's going to push up. And the force magnitude is 15. So it's a fairly strong force compared to the size of the squirrel there. And the target is the squirrel's rigid body. So the moment that squirrel enters, you will see, let's see, that the squirrel will be forced up. And it will also, depending on how much force it already has, and it's going to bounce around because there's another, you'll notice that there is a rigid body and a collider, or at least a collider up on this branch up here as well. All right. All right, so that's another thing that's going on. Okay, so that is the area effector, and that's also using the collider that is, this is a polygon collider actually around that particular bush there. If we look here, you see polygon collider 2D, and if I hover over it, you'll see all the edges of the polygon collider. So that is the collider used by the effector here. Again, it's a trigger, so I don't actually collide with it, but it is a trigger used by the effector. So the moment I overlap in there, I get that force pushing the squirrel up. That's why that that fun ant is having just a field day in there. He's just constantly being pushed around, bounced off things, and so on. All right. What other stuff do we have going on here? All right, well, we've got our squirrel, and let's try to get him kind of a little momentum here. Okay, he is bounced up, and we're going to try carefully. We're going to get up on this sort of little ramp thing. This is a hinged branch, and we weren't really going to talk about hinges or joints in this one, but we'll save that for the next one. But we're going to use that joint, try to use that joint to get up onto, there we go. I'm going to remember what key, to get up onto this other branch that you see kind of over here. I'm going to use a little, having some fun here. All right, and up here, all right, now on this branch, I'm going to use it now, kind of kick it as a ramp. Up here, jump, and I missed it. I'm going to try that again. Here, whoops, and jump up. All right, and didn't quite get there. So this is a challenge. The only way to get onto that hinged branch is through this little clearing kind of thing in here, and got it. Okay, it's trickier than it looks. Imagine there's just something repelling me out of these shrubs here. I get really scared, and I missed it. There we go. And we jump, and we missed it again. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to grab the squirrel here, and we will move up. My Unity account is freaking out over here for some reason. All right, so I'm going to drop down onto that branch. The hinge will go, turn it into a ramp, and I'm going to try to run up and jump, and I missed, of course. I want to jump onto that branch. Okay. Here we go. Ugh. All right, the weird thing is, of course, as I am running, and I can't do run and jump at the same time. There. I just changed the geometry in this area. That's my problem. All right, and... All right, I'm going to take the squirrel, move the squirrel over here, drop him down on here. So this is a surface effector. Watch what happens when the squirrel hits the surface effector. Okay, he gets launched in that direction. So, say I go into my scene, and I'll click on that branch, and we'll move it down a little bit, make it a little bit easier to get to. And I just move that other branch that's supposed to be kind of hiding it back there to make it look cool. And you'll see as he falls, I'm going to fight it. All right, I kind of fought the branch. And let's see if I can fight it again here. And this is going to shoot me up. I gotta do some serious play testing in here. Oh. All right, so anyway, the idea behind this surface effector is pretty simple. What a surface effector does is it applies a force according to the surface of the collider. So if we look at the collider here, down in the scene, you will see that it is just a typical 2D box collider, and when we touch the surface of that, it's going to push us in one direction or the other along that surface. Okay, so here is the surface collider, and you'll see it as a speed of 10 and a force scale of 0.5. So it is going to multiply any, it's going to use a force relative to the mass of the object and then try to launch it at a certain speed. So this means I can sort of launch things according there. So if you wanted to have like a conveyor belt, or you wanted to have, you know, some kind of thing to shoot objects around, that's another way to do it. Okay, so that was a area effector here, and a point effector, and a surface effector. And let's see, those are three of the main ones. That's what other effectors are there. Buoyancy effectors can cause you to float. Platform effectors are kind of neat in that they allow you to basically push things through or create sort of one-sided objects that exert a force in one direction but not the other. Visual effects are something entirely different. Surface effectors, point effectors showed those. Okay, now one thing to be aware of. Now, if you're trying to have an effector that has a force on a player, it's a little bit trickier. You have to be careful about how you design your character controller for it, because you want it to be able to react to a force. Now, a lot of the time, if we have, say, the squirrel controller here, a lot of the time, if we were just explicitly setting the velocity of the squirrel according to the input axis, for example, if I just said, okay, velocity equals this, then that's going to override any sort of natural physics, any sort of dynamic physics that's going on in the system. So it's not going to work particularly well with effectors, right? So you have to be kind of using add force when it comes to things in your scene that you want to be affected by other things that add force. Otherwise, they kind of override one another. So this is how I came to, this is how I decided to kind of make this work in here. It's a little bit tricky. So this is going on in the fixed update, which isn't updating once per frame. It's per physics cycle. Okay, this is called once per physics cycle. Fixed update. All right, and it does all of its normal stuff. But here's what it does. It says, okay, if the absolute value, so we figure out, okay, if I was going to try to add a velocity, and so that has some x component, if I'm going to try to add that velocity to my existing velocity, is that going to be overall the magnitude or the absolute value of that x velocity? Is that going to wind up being less than 8, which is okay. So I don't want to infinitely add force. I only want to add force so long as the velocity of the object here, the squirrel, is less than 8. So it has sort of a maximum speed. All right. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, I can add that velocity. And now I'm just using the velocity is going to be from 0 to 1. So it's a relatively small number. And it's going to be, it definitely has an effect on, if the mass of the squirrel happens to be, whatever, this is going to have, you're going to have to tune this value based on the mass of your squirrel. Now, or the object that's moving. So in this case, since my squirrel actually has a mass of 1, that force is going to be relatively meaningful. So relatively meaningful. So I go ahead and just use that. And I use an impulse force. And so that means it's going to apply all of that force in this particular frame. It's not going to try to spread that across any other amount. Normally, if you say force mode 2.force, it's going to try to spread that. It's basically going to divide the force by roughly a second, depending on whatever your frame rate is and so on. It kind of hides that from you. But you're just saying, okay, force mode force, that's going to effectively make this number a lot smaller. One might be 1/60th, 1/50th, whatever, however things are set up. So I'm just going ahead and saying, all right, apply an instantaneous force at that velocity as long as the velocity of the object is currently less than this maximum, 8. Okay, and because I do that, this way, the system itself, everything going on in the engine, is free to add other forces and manipulate the velocity and so on of the engine. So this is why everything kind of moves in that really kind of realistic, flowy kind of way. All right. Now, one thing you might notice, if you are moving around, sometimes the player sort of skids and so on. Other times he doesn't. This is one example. Like here on this terrain, he does not skid much. But on this terrain up here, this is kind of a floor, he tends to slide a little bit more. Okay, so why is that? Well, what I'm doing here is if I look at the tree object, the tree tile map, on here, the material on this tile map collider 2D is set to this material I've made called sticky. Okay, see this sticky material here. So what is this material about? All right, a little side note here. This is called a physics 2D material. Now you can make it, you can put anything. So we'll go to assets, and I probably should have said, let's see, create a folder called 2D materials, and within there I should probably organize my 2D materials. So I got some organizing to do here. So in here now I have sticky. Okay, and I can add other materials as well. I can say create, where are they? Physics material 2D. There's another one. I'll call this bouncy, a bouncy material. And you'll see up here, there's not too much to change. You have a friction setting and a bounciness setting. So sticky has a fairly high friction coefficient and 0 bounciness, whereas bouncy might have a fairly high bouncy coefficient and a close to frictionless thing here. So let's see what happens if now, I don't know why, let's see, that's going to drive me crazy. So now in the game, this surface here, the tree over here, is still using the sticky surface, and the background, which is what I'm standing on right now, let's see if we can see, that's the background, including this area up here. So there's the tree, there's the background, all right? There, the tile map. There's the background tile map, there's the tree tile map, right? So the tree tile map has this sticky And the background tile map actually doesn't have any physics material in it right now. So it doesn't have any sort of friction and things, which is why I kind of skid along there, right? It just uses some kind of zero default sort of thing. So let's go ahead and let's say background. Let's going to put a physics material in there. We'll put the bouncy physics material in there. Yikes. Let's see what happens. So, and the player comes along and he hits that, and boy, he bounces. Yeah, crazy how high he bounced, and he is falling, and that was amazing. So bouncy was way, way too high. Let's go over here, tune bouncy down to be 0.5, and try that again. And here he goes, bounce, and he fell off. All right. So our squirrel cam didn't quite keep up with him there. Did I turn off the squirrel cam? No, the squirrel cam is functional. I guess we must have just gone sort of beyond the limits of what it could handle. Yeah, we're kind of following it, interpolating it off the end of the world. All right, so that was a quick little lesson on effectors and a little sidetrack into physics 2D materials and a little tease on this hinge joint over here. So check things out, try it, ask me questions, send me messages, let me know what you think of that. So this is almost the sort of thing that could be just your test scene in quote unquote project 4, where we have some decent motion of the main character, we have some effectors, we have use of tile maps, and we have a camera system that's sort of moving things around. So it's developing into a cute little test bed of things. All right, take care.